Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Billion Dollar Banker podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Perone, and today I am so excited to have Julia Spillman, CEO of the Eklund Gomes Team, here with us. We're doing this interview right now remote. Julia's coming live from Istanbul. Julia, thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Long overdue to catch up.
I know. Well, I was really excited the first time that we met. I've always been just incredibly impressed by you and what you've built. And as I looked into your background kind of before we got started here, I learned a lot about you that I didn't actually know. And I'd love to kind of introduce you to everyone. You are the CEO of the Eklund Gomes team. For those that don't know, the million dollar listing extraordinaire that, everyone kind of puts you on the map a little bit in many ways for the public eye. But your background's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about who you are and your journey into where you are today.
Perfect. Well, as I always say, first and foremost, I'm just a girl from a really, really small town in Kentucky who had a really big dream, who had great parents who, didn't think I was crazy when I said I wanted to go to the big city and leave the small town. And when I say small town, I mean really small town. We now are my town that I'm from, Livermore, Kentucky. We just crossed over about 1,000 people in the town, and the whole county still doesn't even have a stoplight. So we've got two flashing caution lights now.
Oh my
But I mean, we're
goodness.
talking like really, really small, humble beginnings. So started out there, went to school in Kentucky, and then after that, headed to Florida, where I am now, and kind of been back and forth. But during college, I did my internship at HSBC. So obviously, I think it's probably one of the many reasons you and I bonded was having that banking and finance, and mortgage background. And I think for me, so did HSBC internship, worked there, and then ultimately landed myself at Merrill Lynch. And I think that it was such a great starting point because, as you know better than anybody, it provides like such structure. So to be a young girl coming out of school from Kentucky, from a really, really small town, I really loved the structure, the organization, and just like the corporate sense that it really put into me at a really, really young age. But what I didn't love is I loved the clients, but I felt very disconnected from them. So as I would always joke, I would see the appraisals in black and white, or I would be on the phone calls with them when they were in the car with, interior designers or on their third showing. And I quite frankly, I got really jealous. I wanted to experience that side. And I think now, obviously, you guys are much more involved with the process. You're much more involved with the agents. But 15, 16, 17 years ago, I just kind of felt like a human computer. And so moved to New York. It'll be, I believe it's 15 years in October, and saw that as the big break to kind of go over to the dark side. Like, what if I try the real estate sell side? So lived in a great building downtown, 20 Pine. And, of course, like any of these big buildings, you have all these great agents working open houses. They're constantly showing through buyers, and approached one of them and said, "Hey, I'd love to take you out to coffee and really like learn more about it." So that really was the start of kind of where we are now. And I always like say to people, because people always say like, what has been the biggest, advantage that you had? And I think for me, it started with exactly that story, was curiosity. And I talk about that constantly in the sense like people want to have everything so black and white. And I'm pretty corporate, especially in the industry. But at the same time, I think you have to be curious. And what are people doing? Why are they doing it that way? And I was always really, really curious in the real estate space. So started on a big team, Ariel Cohen, who, took me in. I didn't know how to ride the subway in New York City. I was very clueless. I just got my license. Obviously, I knew the structure and the background and the financing, but you know, I didn't even know, which numbers of the street was north, south, east, west. I really knew nothing about the city. And I remember him saying to me in his office, he's like, "Let's do this. Jump in the car and take notes." And, I really did. I learned the business on the other side of it. I was telling a story actually at dinner the other night. I would go out, so I would get clients, and I worked on a big team, so I was fed a lot of clients, and I was so nervous that they were going to like out me. That, oh my gosh, she really doesn't know the city. She hasn't lived here that long. She hasn't been doing it that long. Loved walking, still do. And I would go out the night before and I would walk the entire tour. And what I would do, I try to time it up the same time as I'd be going out the next day. So then I would see the doorman and I would introduce myself. So then the next day, when I saw them again, they would recognize me. So then I did all the different things, like what side of the road was the building on, what was the local coffee shops. So I really taught myself the city. And I look back, it's always so funny because people, as you know too well, they always want to like skip to third base.
Mm-hmm.
And as amazing it's been to do all these great things with John and Frederick and the team, some of my favorite memories of the industry was really learning the business and learning the buildings, learning the streets, learning how to utilize and leverage my finance and real estate, or excuse me, real estate mortgage background into ultimately really preparing buyers.
Right.
So it's a fun story that I think most importantly has really strengthened the depth of the bench that I'm able to really bring to the table as ultimately an agent, a broker, and now a leader and owner of a large organization.
Well, it's an absolutely incredible story. I'm excited to hear about it. I'm sure the audience is too, because a woman in a male-dominated industry really advancing, taking risks. I mean, that was a big risk to get out of a business you were doing
Yeah.
well in and say, you know what, I think I'm going to start all over again. I think I'm going to just start from scratch, doing something I don't really know much about, right, on the real
Mm-hmm.
estate side. But I do agree with you that I think that corporate background and training sets an amazing foundation that I don't know you always have on the real estate side of
Yeah.
the business. So bringing that to the table, I'm sure, has been instrumental in the growth of the team. But a lot of the times the themes that we hear on this show is people that have been incredibly successful is taking risks and believing in
Mm-hmm.
themselves
Yeah.
and getting prepared, studying, doing the homework, doing the hard work. And I think you're right. As we look back, the journey was like really exciting, especially when you get to the end of it. You say, "Okay, I made it. I've succeeded. Like it
Mm-hmm.
happened." When you see the journey and all the work that went into it, it's exciting. And I think our viewers getting to see that, it's hopefully inspirational to them. When you think about Eklund Gomes, right, this team, how did it happen where you moved from the first team you started with to Eklund Gomes? Tell us about that.
Well, talking about risk, so had a really phenomenal thing with my original team. I really focused on the financial district. And of course, all the neighborhoods are so great and they've developed in such an exciting way. But
Hmm.
this was, gosh, you know, 10, 10. Well, when I started on the financial district, it was 15 years ago. It was a very, very different area. And then when John and Fred approached me, it was probably about 13 years ago to essentially interview for a potential sales director job on one of the projects they were doing, Five Beekman. And I was so excited. I was so nervous. I didn't really know them at the time. And I just was too young at that point. I didn't have the experience, and they really needed someone super senior to break into that neighborhood to really take it to the next level.
Hmm.
And so I didn't ultimately get the job. But what I did is I got the opportunity to really, introduce myself to some developers, but most importantly to John and Frederick, my now partners. And I remember so vividly after going through the interviews and ultimately not working, John Gomes, which is, one of the sweetest people on, planet Earth, he put on that, like, it's almost like I could still feel his hand. We were at a big corporate event afterwards, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "We really loved getting to know you." Because after all of that, I did, we had this great interview and we were talking about Barry's Boot Camp, which, I'm a huge Barry's Boot Camp fan and have been for a very long period of time. So I sent them this, and they were saying, "Oh, we'd never been. We hear such great things." So I sent them a thank you note with a card in there for, several classes, which was right down the street from their office. So really, I dropped it off. I made it super personal. I did all the things, and I just remember John being like, "It didn't work out. We really were rooting for you, but at some point we're going to do something really great together. And I remember leaving that interaction. I thought, oh my God, he's so good at sales. I actually fully believe him. Now,
Mhm.
fast forward 3 years later, I get a call from him. I'm at the chiropractor. And, when Frederick or John calls anyone, like you pick up the phone, and I'm getting adjusted at the chiropractor. And I look down at my phone and I was like, oh my God, it's John Gomes. And I like jump up. I remember I couldn't get great cell service. So I like went to the window and everybody's looking at me like crazy. And he says to me, okay, now it's time. And I was like, time for what? And I went into their office and they had two really, really fantastic projects. One was One Seaport, which was in the financial district, and the other one was Steiner East Village. And I said to them, they were like, we'd love to work with you finally. We think this could be a great opportunity. And of course, you know the financial district better than anyone. And I said to them, I was like, guys, I know this sounds crazy, but I really, really want to do the East Village gig because I feel like all I'm doing is the financial district. And they were like, okay, let's think on it. And that night, Frederick called me and he said, look, I've been thinking about it. And I totally get and appreciate what you're saying,
Mhm.
but this is going to be the project of the financial district. And you've done all the condo conversions, you've done all the big notable sales there, you've got to finish the job. And I was like, you're right. If somebody else does it, I'm going to be upset. Took the job. We had amazing, amazing chemistry, all of us working together. My contract admin at the time, Susie, is now our COO. I mean, that the whole group is still together in the biggest way. But that building, is, I know it never happened. So I gave up really 2.5 years of my life where I made no money ultimately on that building. And we sold it record time. We broke every record in the financial district. We broke most of the company's velocity and absorption records, and then it ultimately never happened. And I think for me, it was such this, like, if I could have built the building and helped with all the issues, I would have done that part as well, but I couldn't. And we went to a dinner kind of as everything was getting rocky. And when at that point we thought, oh, we had sold all of this, we're moving on to the next project. And someone asked me, they said, what's your intentions of this dinner? And I said, I want to do everything with John and Fred. And they said, okay, let's start with what's the next thing you want to do. And I said, no, I'm serious. I want to do everything with John and Fred. They're so incredibly talented. They're brilliant, brilliant marketers. The way they look at buildings and floor plans and finishes, I still, a decade later, am in total awe of. But their strong suit wasn't, because of course they're these star brokers, really running the business in an operational way. And oddly enough, I love working with developers because, again, I understand the financing, I understand the debt, I understand the bigger picture and the financial modeling. I'm not really a creative, I'm not a great marketer. So the combination with John and Fred, and then, now Susie, well, Susie again from the early days, was this like perfect combination of the business side, the creative side, the marketing, the organization, the financing. The four of us really embodied kind of everything you needed. And I think that
Right.
that's one of the hard things about being a broker is you're wearing too many hats, and it's a little bit of jack of all trades, master of none. And because their business was so big, there was this ability to divide out the jobs and really be able to run together in our own lanes, because we're going to the same place but without really colliding into each other. And
Now, was this all before like $1 million listing and that opportunity, or you're
so John and Fred already had, or excuse me, Frederick already had $1 million listing. John was on one of the original shows. He was on, I believe it was called Selling New York with HGTV.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that buzz,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously it really helped put them on the map. But
Right.
what I really saw in it was like, how do we make it a business?
Right.
How do we take what they already have and the exposure and the eyeballs and catapult it to the next level?
And take it somewhere new.
So
Yep.
that's what I presented to them was, okay, guys, you're super, super involved in these new developments and the shows and all the things, but how do we leverage those things and monetize it? And none of those stars were really doing that. They were making businesses and celebrities out of themselves, but
Mhm.
they weren't really making a business and a huge company out of their brokerage business.
Hmm. Interesting. And so, obviously, and I mean that's a big part about business in general. You have to have the right team, but like
Yeah.
what you guys have achieved is been like no other, right? Number one team in all of it in your entire company, correct?
Yeah. In the US. Yeah.
In the
Hmm.
US.
Yep.
How do you like what do you say are the main contributors to that? It's not just obviously that you have a great team. It's got to be there's something special that you guys have.
Yeah.
What would you say like the top two or three things that really make you guys unique in
you
that?
know, Touching a little bit, and obviously another connection of you and I, like these powerful women, in these big corporate roles. I was just in Albania, as I was saying when we were catching up, and kind of looking like everybody's buzzing Albania, what's going on. And interesting enough, one of my dearest girlfriends grew up there.
Hmm.
So went there with a large group of friends and was spending some time with her partner. And he was like, it's so touching to see you and Aida together, and to see what she has, a wonderful startup in Stockholm, kind of talking about like what we've created, especially as women. And I said to him, I said, it's so interesting you say that, because the early days of that girl group in New York is really what kind of inspired a lot of the ways that like we run the sales team. And it was about 12 girls. I mean, I guess we're women now, 12 girls that I felt like when I moved to New York, like were the inspiration of exactly what I wanted to be. They were elegant, beautiful, kind, educated, hustlers. They were all the things, and they were always inspired to be more and to be better. But what made them very different to me, especially with girls, was they weren't competitive at all. There was no drama, there was no competition. It was really almost like this flipped script of how do we collaborate to make each other better. And I remember, especially with my girlfriend Aida, she was a big runner. I'd never ran at all. And I was getting into Barry's boot camp, and she said, okay, well, I'll go to Barry's with you and we can use that as like training to do 5Ks, 10Ks. And then ultimately, she and I did several half marathons. But I was so inspired by this this almost like weird thinking of like, well, wait a second, if we're not like I was competitive as an 8-year-old. If someone's really successful like you, I guarantee you, like we talked to your mom right now, she'd have all the stories about, you in the school play having to be the lead, or like whatever it is. Like these type A alpha personalities, like we were born competitive. And it's not for me to try to figure out how to make these individuals more competitive. It's how do I make them better? And that collaboration is what I really think is our special sauce. And
Mm.
every other week we do this huge national call where, we have guest speakers on different topics, on different markets, and they're pretty much telling all their secrets. I
Mhm.
mean, it's amazing at what this group of individuals shares, because it's an exchange program.
Say in
So it's
one
like,
word, it's like it's collaboration,
yeah,
but it's like it's like spawned and it's lit by this
yeah.
desire to be competitive, this desire to be is do you feel like that's a driving force for the team in general? Like number one, we want to be the best. Are you all equally as competitive?
I mean, I think everybody's pretty competitive, but like I said, it doesn't have that competitive energy, because you know how like you'll meet someone and they're a one upper, or name dropper, or whatever it is. It's more like we're name dropping our skill set so that we can exchange. Like that's the EG currency
Yep.
is, oh, I've got this really great marketing concept, or I have this great photographer that I want to share with everybody. So everybody sees it as, a commodity in the exchange place that everybody's willing to share. And I think it's so touching. I think it's also, and I know this one's like a little cheesy, especially coming from such like a corporate background, but we really are a big family. I was just with my little sister in Tuscany with Fred's whole family. I'm texting, I have probably 10 personal texts out to agents right now on dinner or a friend's at another friend's party in London. And, I think that that also keeps us very connected. I think as much as, and how much I'm on the road, you, this whole work life balance, like, sounds great, but at the top of the game, like, you're not really going to have that. And I call it more like a blurred lines. So how do I go to XYZ on a business trip, but also, meet a friend there over the weekend? Or, Frederick and John are two of my best friends. How do we have, a wildly packed day, but then have a really fun dinner, kind of bonding at night? So I think we're just a little bit more, we're going to own the fact that, like, you know, we're workaholics, but we're also, nobody's going to feel sorry for me because I've been working in Europe the last 3 weeks. So I think we just take a lot of ownership of things that maybe the industry doesn't want to address. And then we're kind of like, okay, guys, if we're never going to see our friends, we're going to bring our friends to work.
Right, they're coming with us. I love
Yeah.
that. I mean, everybody on the outside, people see, the glitz, the glam, a lot of luxury, a lot of travel, beautiful new development, communities, buildings. I mean, it looks like on the inside, I'm sure it looks a little bit different than that day to day. So tell us, like, what does it really take to run a $1 billion team like this? How many people do you have? What is everybody doing every day? To tell us like a day in the life of behind the scenes running a $1 billion team like this.
I mean, I talk pretty openly about this. Again, I think the banking background had a lot to do with it. It's all about structure, and it's all about, I don't have to tell you, this is a very reactive business. It's a lot of emotions, just maybe not, I am not known for being terribly emotional, but I think having a really, really high EQ is incredibly important. And most importantly, being able to control and lead. Again, whether you're an agent or, running agents. And I think that, we wake up every day and you're either starting the day ahead of it or you're behind it. The biggest misconception is that somehow you're going to be able to outpace being behind. Like, you're going to make up 2 minutes here and this and that. I think that's completely impossible. And most importantly, I think if you start the day early in a very proactive manner, at least you're ahead of things with the anticipation that we all know we're going to have to react in live time pretty much throughout the day. And whether it's something as silly as back in the day as mapping out your entire tour, or, I look like an actual psychopath. When people look at my phone, it's like, I'm like, oh no, I hope they don't see the calendar. I
Mm.
have in my calendar, you know, pick up packages, you know, drive to this location. My entire life, maybe it's a little bit boring, when you look at it, but it's very, very proactive. So I'm not going to get today and be like, oh my gosh, it's actually 30 minutes to here versus 20 minutes. All of this is already charted for me the night before. So the more someone can plan and be proactive, it's better the chances that you're going to quote unquote win the day.
It's great. It's great advice. And it's true. You need to have a plan. You need to follow that plan. You need to be prepared. You need to have things scheduled. And I'm sure, again, it doesn't just look like it does on the outside, right? On the inside, there's a lot of work. It's a lot of preparation. How difficult is it to geographically operate with you? You guys are international. You're a lot of travel. Tell us about running a team and kind of everyone being in different locations. How do
Well,
you
I think
manage that?
again, it goes back to planning. I think, like anything, this whole thing is a relationship, and you have to make people feel seen and heard,
Sure.
and you have to be available, even, and my team, I mean, they're the best. And like I said, we're also like closely, personally close as well. So like, I know you're at so and so, but I'm like, I am always available. One of the things I set up early with the team was kind of like, a priorities list in the sense of if you email me, you will always get a response that day. If you text me, you're going to get a faster response. And if you call me, I will, and I sleep a lot because I'm on the road and working so much. But unless I'm sleeping, I will take the call. But my in return of that is them having that same priority in the sense of like, if it can be an email, make it an email. If it needs a little bit more of a sign, time sensitivity around it, make it a text. And if you need me immediately, I will be there. And the team is so, so respectful with the time because they know when they make that call, they want to make sure I'm always going to be able to answer. So I think there's a lot of structure and disciplines put into place. And then it also too, it needs to be able to be scalable. So, what is the expectations of my team? What is the expectations of agents? And one of the reasons that we expanded nationally so that we could service our client in any market. So if a big client in New York is selling something in California, while yes, there's different forms and there's different things, of course, because it's a different state, but the experience start from finish should be somewhat similar. And I think that we are incredibly personally and professionally disciplined individuals. And I think that really sets the tone for the organization.
Yeah. It's so much to take care of when you're dealing with a client transaction, especially, a luxury client or a developer
Mhm.
and coordinating everything. But it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is like you set expectations very clearly with your team.
Yep. Yep. With everybody. I think even also too, like working with the seller, developer, buyers, again, I'm on the road a lot because, kind of like we were talking about in the catch up, it's important that we know what's going on across the US, one of the many reasons I went to Albania, to kind of see what's going on there. But also, I'm in Saint Tropez and I'm there with clients and I'm building relationships, I'm meeting new ones. Now, again, I'm not showing houses, so it is easy for me to do that. But I think on the team, everybody's kind of got their role where, we've got a lot of coverage so that people can take that downtime. Because I also think, burnout is I unfortunately experienced at a large, in a very large place. I guess that would have been February 2019. I went to the golden door because I hit extreme burnout. My cortisol levels were through the roof, and I was battling an autoimmune disease that we kind of kept hidden because I was very nervous that if people knew that I was so sick, would they kind of trust to follow my lead? And I always say one of the things I think I've learned the most about business and leadership is it's not that everybody's so smart. Yes, there's certain things like, for example, one of my best friends is a plastic surgeon. Like he has an actual real skill set, you
Mhm.
know, and but for us, like we're really in the people business. So it's really about like setting up expectations and like just really honing in on those skills. So I think it's really an interesting, exciting business,
Mm.
but it's a really, really, really hard business if you're not able to over communicate expectations. Again, in your business, like the all this stuff is really kind of annoying, and you don't want to like be that person that's like, okay, I need this form or I'm sending you this DocuSign and this and that. But
Mhm.
the more that you can set that up, the
Mhm.
more success you're going to have. But also too, that bond with the consumer, instead of being like, oh hey guys, it's Friday night at 11 and now I need all this paperwork. You're setting up the expectation of like, this is how the process is going to go.
Yeah.
And I think the better you can get it, that over communication, the better everybody ultimately feels at the end of the day.
Totally agree. You can, leading mortgage groups and bankers and being in this business for almost 20 years, and you know it well, it's the most important thing when it comes to
Yeah.
customers is setting their expectations properly, making sure they understand, what things can occur through the process, what the steps are, what's involved. And when you take the time to do a good job with that, a lot of the stuff in between doesn't come up.
Yeah.
It's like you slow down in order to hurry up rather than hurry up.
Yeah. That's I love that. And it's I said actually to someone the other day, it's like, there's a big difference in doing it right and doing it right now. And I think people constantly, especially the New Yorkers, like we just want to go, 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 go. And I appreciate that. But again, exactly like you're saying, if you can set up a roadmap and over communicate, things aren't going to get weird when, for example, you need this form or you need that. It's also too, like one of the things I have learned so much in like the high end of the business is when very affluent individuals, and sometimes it tends to be a little bit more men, when they don't understand is when they actually shut down. So if you're having to articulate pieces or you're not articulating piece of it and they don't understand it, it goes into fear base. And once somebody hits that fear base, they actually start to shut down. So you've really like lost control of the process. So that's why again I am such a huge, huge, huge over communicator, because it's also built into the subconscious of, oh yeah, she did mention that, instead of like, oh my gosh, this girl's being so annoying. I'm on a vacation or I'm in the middle of a huge acquisition and now they need a stupid form that I don't even understand.
Hmm.
So, but I think that agents in general don't really run their business like a business. And I think the more they can stop kind of thinking of the individual transaction and think of it as customer service, as a lifelong relationship, as a personal relationship, and most importantly, I think you have to remember it's a very emotional process. It's, and 9.5 out of 10 people, it's the biggest asset they'll ever own.
Yeah.
So, of course, even the best of the business or, of business leaders are going to get really flustered in an emotional sense. And I think sometimes we don't really give people like the space to really experience that and almost remind ourselves of like, okay, yes, this is just a transaction to us, but this is the transaction to them.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's great advice because it is, I think it's one of those things, if you set the expectation with a client and you create this personal relationship with them, you're like, hey, I might torture you a little bit. This might be a little painful from time to time, but here's how we're gonna work through it. Here's what you can expect. Here's what you're gonna get from me. And that relationship is key. This business is all about relationships. You're absolutely
Yeah,
right. And I'd imagine most of your time is spent in that space. Obviously, you
yeah,
ran the business, you've set up the machine. How about other realtors out there? I mean, I'm sure you do a lot within your firm and kind of giving advice and sharing, like you talked
yeah.
about collaboration. What's some of the advice you give to agents out there that say, hey, I want to build a team like this one day. I want to that, 10 years from now, how can I get to where you are? What would your advice be to them?
It's so interesting because people ask this a lot, or they'll kind of say like, "Well, you guys are Eklund Gomes, so it's so different." We're doing the same thing as everybody else, just on such a large, large scale. So there's nothing that I've built or am building or hope to build that, an individual doing, let's say, Harlem rentals shouldn't be doing the same setup. And most of the success of our business isn't these huge technological breakthroughs. They're really just doing the basics and continuing to refine those. So every time that we go through a big growth spurt, whether, COVID obviously was the biggest one, we
Mhm.
actually did a huge summer sessions on and called it back to basics, because that's the time as the business gets too busy that you actually get sloppy on the little details that are the basics that will ultimately continue to always propel the business forward. So I think with agents, again, I think they're always thinking like, okay, well, Eklund Gomes is Eklund Gomes. They're not doing newsletters or mailers or handwritten notes. And absolutely we are. That's the core, that's the building block of the business. And we're not exempt from that. We're probably doing it bigger, and a lot of times bigger than anybody. And I think that one of the things I always say to agents, as great as it is to do, and we've been so fortunate to do several of the $100 million plus deals, as amazing as those are, the meat and potato of every business, even ours, is going to be, and I'm just using New York numbers, but that $1 to $5 million sweet spot. So this illusion of once I get and do $10 million deals, I'm never turning back. In my opinion, that's a huge mistake.
Mhm.
And you need to, just like you do with your business, you need to be able to service all ends of the market. I look at Kent Wu, one of our great agents who did the Central Park Tower deal. And it was so cute when he got, he got many awards for that, but when he got the award for, top deal, I guess I've been 2 years ago at our big Tulum retreat. He went up there and we were like, okay, well, like, what's the secret? And he said, guys, don't ever forget the small deals. This was a referral from a rental. And he said, and I'm flying back a day early to go service one of my rental clients from this trip. And
Mm,
if you think that, again, you become too good for those deals, I think you're missing the bigger point. Now, again, do I think you should bring on at that point more assistants and junior agents to help you service so that you can service all ends of the market? Absolutely. But this almost like belief system pie in the sky of like, well, once I go to 20 million, like I'll never have to do these $1 million deals.
mhm.
And, again, you could decide to do that. I think it's a really bad business decision. I think one of the many things that I learned, especially during my Merrill Lynch days, was it's all about a diversified portfolio. And if you look at the way that the markets move, especially with all the different regulations that we've had in the industry, why wouldn't you want to diversify it? Why wouldn't you want to hedge your business? So yes, okay, New York development pipeline, is it robust? Is it used to? But the resale market's still incredibly strong. And for us, like, okay, during this season, Miami is pumping, and then we've got LA comes on grid, then the Hamptons during this time. So we really are running it as a diversified portfolio so that as the markets move and the different sectors within that change, we're still fine. But again,
Diversity. Yep.
it's a lot of proactive planning, which I don't think the average agent is thinking about because they're just trying to get to the next
Get
deal.
the next deal. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's working on the business, right? I've been preaching it on the mortgage side of the business for a long time. We have to diversify. We can't just serve only luxury clients. We have to work with first-time home buyers and investors, and then being geographically fluid is really important too. And I always use the example of look at the top teams in Manhattan. They don't just do business in Manhattan. They're doing tons of
Yeah.
business already, but they said, we need Florida, we need California. To your point, all those
Refer
markets turn
out.
on at
Mm-hmm.
different times, and you can start shifting your focus during different times of year, into those places. COVID taught us an incredible lesson when it came to, geography changing fast, right? And so I assume there's more shifts ahead for you guys when it comes to geography and expansion. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then I'd be curious to know, like, when you think about agents today, because I'm sure a lot of agents will be listening to this. What do you think is holds them back the most to getting to that next level? Is it scaling their business? Is it creating a plan? What is it that kind of keeps them kind of always looking for that next client and not taking the next steps of digging deeper?
Again, I think it goes back to like structure, discipline. I think one of the things in the theme of talking about risk,
Mm,
a lot of times when you need the additional help, it's right before you actually get there. And I think people are too hesitant to bring on an assistant, to bring on a junior agent, to bring on a marketing person. And I think, again, we're in the business of investing in ourselves. And one of the many things, but one of the greatest things I've learned from Fred is really manifesting things. So putting it out there, betting on yourself. And again, a lot of times with an assistant, people are like, well, I'm not really ready to spend that money, or I'm not just there just yet. And when you start to have those conversations, it's usually exactly when you need to have them. And you've got to think on it as not an additional payout, but an additional ability to make profits. And I think that it's really a business where you have to really, really double down and bet on yourself. And we're putting I don't do a lot of like videos and content and things like that. And I have so much respect for these agents that do, because it's really hard
mhm,
what these agents need to do, in the sense of like, they need to have a great eye for photography, they need to understand design, they need to understand material, they need to be well spoken and beautifully dressed on camera. It's
mhm.
so many things. And I think the more help you can kind of bring in and double down on it, the better place of strength. One of the interesting exercises we did with our business coach years ago was you had to take 3 days and you had to chart every single detail. And I'm talking about 5 minutes on a phone call, 3 minutes to get in the car, and we wrote down everything. And it was interesting. So for my support staff, it really told us what they like doing and what they're really efficient at, and it showed us what they didn't like doing and what took them a lot longer. Like one of our team members in LA would take him forever on marketing, and he didn't enjoy it. Like me, he wasn't that strong at it, and we realized by doing all of these, well, wait a second, if we took a virtual assistant or put someone else in that place, well, wait a second, now he could do the stuff that he's really good at, and then have someone that actually is really strong at marketing working on that.
Because you
Hang
start
on
to
one
see
second.
that it's
I'm
really
just going
not.
to plug my computer in.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you start to see that it's not time that's in the way when you do an audit like that. For listeners, I'm hearing, Julia say right now that they're doing a lot of the things that people in the beginning you think would be doing, not necessarily at these levels of massive success, but doing things like hiring coaches, doing time audits, making sure that they're, focusing on the strengths of their team. I've done coaching like that before, Julia, and the interesting thing is it was the same routine. A lot of people, I think, in business have never done a time audit like that. And one of the things you'll find
Oh,
again is it's
it's,
not time. It's just you decide you don't want to do certain things and you make
yeah,
room for other things, right?
yeah.
So it's a good
You know,
way for you to evaluate people's strengths and weaknesses and
mhm.
decide. You
Well,
mentioned
and I
Marriage
also think,
Boot Camp a couple times. I don't know what that is. The audience may not either. So can you tell us about that? Is that like a coaching program or is it like sounds like a
oh,
thing?
Barry's boot camp is just a great workout.
Okay.
So,
How about
yeah.
coaching? When you mentioned coaching, who have you guys engaged for
So
that?
we used Aaron Keith, I mean, I've been working on and off with him for about a decade. And, it's funny, I had a friend start with him recently. He's like, well, he's just kind of doing the basic stuff. And I said, yes. And he was like, wait, I thought he was going to do something like game changing. I was like, well, if you ask me, what do I know about sales? It's game changing, because once you start to get success, like I was saying earlier, that's when that structure actually falls behind. So I think whether it's a super successful senior agent bringing on a team that needs structure, which most agents don't know how to do, or it's a new agent that's looking to really set those different pieces in place. And then once they have the business, it's not as overwhelming. But for
Mhm.
me, as you could say, a consistent theme really is going back to the basics and never ever really losing sight of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to hear. I think that, it's the people out there that you see achieving tremendous levels of success are really just doing the same thing that you need to be doing at a better scale, right? And
Mm-hmm.
investing more in the business. I think that's
Yeah.
that's another key component that you mentioned. Talk about the future of Eklund Gomes. I mean, how much more is there to achieve for you guys? Where
Ooh,
next?
I mean, that's something we're kind of looking at. Like I said, I think, you know, Fred, John, Susie, and I really, really push each other. I think one of the great things has been now we're pushing each other professionally. And I think as we get a little older, I think it's all becomes a little more overwhelming being at the top, because you know that everybody's like kind of watching what you do, trying to emulate it. And now you've got a lot of really young, really talented, really educated, kids coming out that know more about technology and AI and have more hours in the day and things like that. And I think that it really has kept us on the toes to not only, reinvent ourselves professionally every year to continue to stay on top, but really reinvent ourselves personally. And I think that, for us, we're trying to kind of figure out a little bit what we want to continue to do and get bigger in the international space. Is there another market that makes sense? And then, of course, as if we focus on another market, are we giving up, some potential market share in a bigger market that we could be doubling down on? So I think we're constantly looking at trends, or most importantly, trying to find trends before they become trends. And we're just trying to do really, really great developments across the US and really continue to be known for that. And then have a huge army of resale agents that really support the client in any purchase, any sell, across the US.
Hmm. Amazing.
So,
I'm going to hit you with some fun questions now, okay? And
okay,
then we're going to wrap up because this was
okay.
so exciting. I'm incredibly impressed by everything that you guys have done. You have a
Thank you.
brand like no other. I thank you for joining. I'm
Of
excited that the
course.
audience gets to hear from you. I'm sure they're very curious to learn about how you've done everything you've done. I don't know, maybe there's more ahead for me in the lending world. Maybe I'll turn to the dark side one day. Who knows? But all right, so these are some fun questions. All right, one's if you could have one superpower to use in real estate, what would it be?
I mean, I think it's probably would be the answer to why a lot of people, think I'm, quote unquote superhuman. My magical multitasking power. I think that's the most important.
I love it. We got to put like some superhero content together for you. Luxury on a budget. What's one luxury that you'll never give up? Even if you had to live on a budget, what's something you would never give up?
Oh, that's a good one. I think travel.
Travel. How often are you in New Jersey, by the way? Ever?
I mean, a lot less. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I've been spending most of my time in Miami just because our business is really booming there. And I think, again, my ability to move and be incredibly nimble, really allowed, Frederick and myself to really focus on that market in a much larger way. Obviously, personally, I also really, really love Miami. So that did happen to work out on the, as I call it, the blurred line section.
I was going to ask you the next question. Favorite city?
Oof, that one's really difficult. I'm gonna go outside of the U.S. so I don't offend any of our markets,
All right,
but
there you
probably
go.
Paris.
Paris. Okay, I love it. And if you were leading a $1 billion real estate brand, um, actually that makes no sense, that question. It was like, what would you be doing? Here's my last question to you. When you think about the future of AI, technology, content, how are you guys going to try to stay ahead of all that?
We've got something really, really, really exciting coming out in the AI space. Obviously, we have an AI agent on our website, to chatbot Maya.
Maya.
So I think, again, it goes back to the first thing we talked about. It's curiosity. And I think just keeping curious. I'm actually going to a couple conferences this year that aren't your typical mainstay, but I really want to know what agents across the country are doing. So I think for us, and especially someone in like my position, the further I get away from showing and the ins and outs, the more dangerous it actually is to me professionally. So I think a big, big focus is making sure I continue to stay in the weeds and, ears to the ground on what everybody's doing, because just because the person in Kansas City isn't doing $4 billion in sales doesn't mean they're on to something that could be incredibly great for their business and ultimately our industry and our business. So I think it's always listening, it's always being curious, and seeing what is the next steps, because I think we're in for a lot of changes, and the faster we can kind of adapt to it. One of the things they always tease me about, I always say, like, don't give stuff oxygen. And I think sometimes with like a lot of these different changes, people have become paralyzed by them. And that paralyzation isn't going to move you forward. It's just going to stop you dead in the track. So I think it's staying educated, staying informed, but not being overwhelmed by anything, because, our industry is incredibly resilient, and the individual, especially the individuals that make it up, and the ones that have done the best have been during those kind of like darker, harder times, and have saw opportunities in it and have pushed forward.
Hmm. Collaborate, compete, curiosity, lots of C's here.
Yeah.
But all such great advice from you, Julia. Thanks so much. Hey, now I'll be down in Miami in October. I'll reach out to you if you're
Awesome.
down
Come
there.
visit.
It's like, where's Julia? We should like have a book to find you. But it was
We,
absolute pleasure having you today. Thanks for joining us.
of course. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the Jersey summer, and I will see you hopefully very, very soon and
I
definitely in October.
I hope so too. All right, we'll
Perfect.
talk soon.
Thanks,
Bye,
Nicole.
Julia.